Shalom.
The reason it's essential to read the word is because why? This Bible is not an ordinary book. This Bible is your sharp-edged sword.
Still, I understood that the Bible was key to everything.
So this is history of the Bible in the making. Family, we are going to address the actual sources. So let's make some new discoveries. Let's address the unaddressed. Let's get the application of these discoveries even for today. You're going to learn today. So let's take this journey, and glory be to our God. And without further ado, let's get right into it. First, let's clear the air. Pictures are not substantial evidence to identify King James and his family, because the Museum in America calls them worthless fabrications, and the real images painted over due to Cromwell. Yet at the same time, prior to 70 and 500 AD, the inhabitants of Europe were for the most part white. Now let's talk about when the black sons of Jacob came along. And we'll show pictures, not to make the point, but to support the point, unless the pictures are hidden. Okay, so reading from these anthropologists, anthropologists, biologists, and geologists, and paleontologists, supporting this phrase right here, that they said that which we derive from the peculiarity of the Jewish race. For 1800 years, that race has been dispersed in different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. There are some Jews still lingering in the valley of the Jordan, having been oppressed by the successive conquerors of Syria for ages, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. Others of the Jewish people participating in European civilization and dwelling in the northern nations. So it's documented there were black people who had the appearance of Ethiopians. Now they attributed all sub-Saharan Africa, calling it Ethiopia, but one of those Ethiopian races, some Cushite, some of the Shemitic line. And they said that they were as black as any Ethiopians, and they went into Europe. Okay, so we got King James here, who is a Stuart. So let's connect the dots. So we have another historian, a geologist, we're going to be referencing from, just to get the origin of the Stuarts. And it says here that the Stuarts descend from the Stuarts of Dole and Brittany, but little was understood about the relationships and motivations of these antecedents. A fresh analysis of the politics and genealogy of the archbishops whom they serve has provided new insight into their origins, including the discovery of unsuspected Frankish roots. So they're saying that the oldest ancestor that they know of the Stuarts is the Stuarts of the Dole and Brittany, and that they are Franks. So King James' origin goes back to the Franks. Okay, and that's geology and history. Okay, so let's connect the dots. We're going to see that old references also reference the same thing. So we're going to be reading a lot from 1500 sources, 1600 sources, 1700 sources, all telling the story of what actually happened. And we'll also reference even older sources. So this is Orientalist here. This is from a man born in 1624. This is when he was born. So this is what the thought process was then. So it says, Ethiopians, assuming the name from the Greeks, though it be too general, and were formerly common as well to all the swarthy complexion people in Africa. So like I said before, Ethiopia just pertains to everybody that's black. As to the blacks of Ethiopia, But if you require a special name from them, then now we're going to find out who the they is, who this black nation is. Then they call their kingdom Giz. Also, the country of Agazi. This is talking about East Africa, the actual Ethiopia now. Or the land of the Agazium, or freemen, either from the liberty they enjoy or they're transporting themselves from one place to the other. So they actually came to Ethiopia. We're going to find out later where they came from. But it says, for that, the radical word Giza admits of both significations. Perchance, because that in ancient times, translating themselves, now we're still talking about that black nation who went to Ethiopia, out of Arabia and Africa, so now they're leaving that, they're just traveling all over the place in search of other habitations. They assumed that name in sign of liberty as of old, the Germans. Wow. It says, passing the Rhine gave themselves the name of Franks. The Melchites, whereas they always were and still are known to be Jacobites. I know that is just off the wall right there. So according to the old sources, the Franks originate from a black nation who traveled into Ethiopia, then traveled out of Ethiopia, then called themselves Germans, and then went to call themselves Franks. Okay. Also, from older source as well, this guy right here, an explorer, he's born in 1564. So let's see what the process was then about their origin. Now, these are eyewitness accounts of people who were born in King James time. So we're getting the thought process before a lot of other filtering came in, the actual origin. All right. So it says here, this same year saw the discussion between the Jacobites and the Melchites, who are the Franks. So Melchite denotes king. So the Melchites are Jacobite kings, but they're also Franks. So the Jacobites, Franks, all of them the same thing. The Jacobites are a specific type of Frank. All right, and the Franks are from France. So this guy is saying that according to him that they're a black nation, and also it's known there that they're also Jacobites. Okay, so we just read about the Franks from primary sources from the 15 to the 1600s. And they are described by these sources as being originated from a black race that traveled to the eastern part of Africa, to Europe, to establish themselves as the Franks, being in France. Now, 1,000 years earlier, two men born in the 6th century and someone else born in around 400 AD, telling the exact same story. It says, while the Ethiopians live in the south near the meridian. If we look south of meridian, it's literally France. Now, we read about the Franks, an Ethiopian looking race living in France. And now, 1,000 years earlier, we're hearing the same thing. An Ethiopian race living in France. Dots connected. While the Ethiopians live in the south near the meridian. So now we got more on the Franks. This historian here, And it says Theodoric from the house of Witten. So where does Theodoric come from? So this is from this archaeologist, paleographer here. You see he was born early as well, 1655 AD. It says Theodoric, son of Clovis. So where does Clovis come from? So reading from this old source here, by Merove, from whom the Frank kings were called Merovians. Merove begat Childeric, Childeric Clovis. So the house of Witten comes from Clovis, the Frank king. Oh, the house of Witten comes from the Franks. So we're going to read about somebody from the house of Witten. This Frank here, John Elector of Saxony. As you can see, he's from the house of Witten. And this is a picture of John the Elector of Saxony. You see he's a white person there. Look here, there was actually an x-ray that was put on that picture, and they discovered actually a different person that was painted over him. Now you can paint over a picture, but what they painted over him was actually a different person. When we talked about Cromwell, well look, this is actually in the museum. And as you can see, he's clearly black. This is the x-ray of that white person. Under that, he's actually black. There's no way to get around that. Visual evidence of an authentic Frank. So now we talked about how the Jacobites, or the Franks, they were in the eastern part of Africa and they went over to Europe. So now we're going to find out where they were at before they traveled to the eastern part of Africa. And this is from this traveler right here, born 1578 AD. And he says, this sect began in the days of Emperor Martinius, dispersing through the cities of Syria, Mesopotamia, and Chaldea. Yet under other names, their religion extendeth far further. The Copts and Abyssinians being in a manner no other than Jacobites. So we see that before they were in Abyssinia, they were in Mesopotamia, they were in Syria. And before they were in Mesopotamia and Syria, we're going to discover where they were at before then as well, a little later on. This is Neil Gerthy from Society of Antiquaries. And this says here, addressing that King James is in fact a Jacobite. People assume that, they're the followers of the Jacobites, but the Jacobite goes way back further than James II, as we can see here. So if you know what I'm talking about when I say that. And this is the principal Jacobite image, and the one for which all other Jacobites symbols stand proxy, is that of the true king, the identity of the sovereign, and by extension, who is not the sovereign, is the central pillar of the whole edifice of legitimacism. It is James or Charles or Henry who is, by the grace of God, the rightful king. He embodies a dynastic claim. All right, so the Jacobite are King James and their family, the Stuarts, and also the other Jacobites as well. And we're going to go into this, who the Jacobites are. We're going to really go into who King James is. And we're going to deal with the eyewitness who actually went to Europe. This is Josephus, a different Josephus, Josephus Abacus. And it says, as he was commonly known, arrived at Oxford in 1603, but left for France shortly thereafter to teach Arabic in Paris, where he numbered the young Apenaeus among his students. In 1610, he returned to England, and having procured a letter of recommendation from Richard Bancroft. What's so important about this, guys, is that Richard Bancroft is the chief translator of the King James Bible. So this man met one of the translators of the King James Bible. You read the Bible, you should be listening to this. You should listen up. This is important right here. So what he has to say is how he described those people, Richard Bancroft, all those people that he saw in England. I'm sure he saw King James himself, because he was born in an eyewitness of those people. And this is his book, and this is what he said about him. He said, hitherto have we treated the name and origin of the Jacobites, and having proved them to have been descended from the patriarch Jacob. Now here's another thing. He says also, therefore the most probable opinion is this, that they are descended of the ancient patriarch Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, often called Israel in Holy Writ. So another source by him, this is just reading, this is his writing right here. So this is because they are the sons of Jacob and are from thence called Jacobites, as one may see in the first chapter. They, for this reason, observed almost all the Jewish ceremonies. So they were Jews, straight Jews. And another writing of it says, Jacobites, but the before cited patriarch, and this also I can myself affirm, that in their exhortation as well as public as private, I have heard them called Israelites and the flock of Israel. And this is where he also states, and this is done by the Ethiopians or the Jacobites. Notice he uses that word interchangeably. Okay, so now we're going to see specifically what type of Ethiopians. This is Edward Gibbon, born in 1737, an older reference. And he says the Nubians, an African race, are pure Negroes, as black as those of Senegal or Congo, with flat noses, thick lips, and woolly hair. It goes on to say, the ancients beheld without much attention the extraordinary phenomenon which has exercised the philosophers and theologians of modern times. And it says down here, the Christianity of the Nubians, AD 1153, is attested by the sheriff Al-Adresi, falsely described under the name of the Nubian geographer. So they're not Nubian, who represented them as a nation of Jacobites. So the woolly-haired people that were in Nubia were actually a nation of Jacobites. So this is from this anthologist and anthropologist, James Cowell Richard, born 1786 AD. And he identifies the Nuba being Negroes. Now follow me on this. So the Nuba are identified as being Negroes, particularly. And this geologist, born in this year here, identifies the Nuba as being Negroes as well, saying Nuba, that is to say, Negroes. So they're used interchangeably. Some people use Nuba as referring to Nubia, but in its actual meaning, it does not have a Nubian origin, as we see here from this anthologist and anthropology and Egyptologist. He states here that Nuba does not have a Nubian origin. So now we're reading from this geographer and historian here from a perspective of 800 AD. So he would be an eyewitness account. And he states, Nuba have become two kingdoms. The first is the kingdom that they call Merkura. The capital of their kingdom is Dongola. It is they who made peace with the Muslims and paid them back. The other Nubian kingdom, which they call Alwa. So now, reading about Alwa, because we see that the kingdom of Alwa was started by the Nuba, who are Negroes. Right? We read from those sources exactly who they are. So now, understanding that this Negro kingdom of Alwa is just that, let's look at the history files. And the history files by these guys here. And we're reading from this archaeologist, Derek A. Welsby. And he states the African kingdom of Alodea, Aloha, or Alwa, the Arabic form of the name. So Alodia and Alwa are the same thing, just different languages. That's why we brought that out there, just to make that clear. So this archaeologist states that both it and Alodia emerged in the centuries after the fall of the Kushite kingdom. So these Negroes in Alodia are not Kushites because they came to Kushite territory after the Kushites fell. All right. And it says, which had dominated the region from 785 BC to AD 350. So understanding that, let's find out who these people of Alodia actually are. These Negroes, who these people are. It's from the scholar here who was born between the 600s AD, and it says here from his writing, town of Alwa. Here are troops and a large kingdom with wide districts, in which there are 400 churches. The town lies to the east of the large island between the two rivers, the White and the Green Nile. All its inhabitants are Jacobite Christian. So the Negro race that we just read about of Alwa, from a source 800s, we're reading here from 600s AD that these people from eyewitness accounts are Jacobites. Okay, so I got to bring out this source here. This is from this archaeologist, historian, scholar. And this is the book, The Lost Tribes, A Myth, Suggestions Towards Rewriting Hebrew History. And he writes it because the way they determine the lost tribes now is a myth, because they know who the tribes are. And they identify it with several anthologists as well. And it's $18,500. You can get it on eBay for cheaper, but it'll let you know that there are going to be some pages missing. So we're going to be reading from this book. This is his map right here. And this is important right here. I'm going to kind of zoom in here. He points out the Yemen Jews and Falashas, Berbers, Moorish, and Negro Jews. Now, we're zooming in on that same map, and it says, other names in red are places of ancient Jewish colonies. So everywhere we see red, it's where the Jews were at. Check it out. Nuba. Yeah, because you remember, after the Kushites were gone from the Nuba place, then some Negroid people came in. And this archaeologist separates the Kushites or Hamites of Nuba and Negroes, who we read from eyewitnesses that identify these Nuba Negroes as Jacobites. Historian states Nuba were Jacobites. Now here's something else about the Jacobite culture that he also states. In addition to stating that they're the Ethiopian people, it's in general, even the lower part of South Africa was called Ethiopia at this time. So let's see here. It says Chalcedon with the secular arm gave the name Melchites, or in other terms, king's followers. This is why people have this whole thing that Jacobites, the only meaning of it is followers of James II. Yes, they were followers of the king, but it goes further than that, of who this king was. And it's very, very biblical. Check this out. To the Orthodox Christians, Melchi, and their original language signifying king. So Melchites were, because King James would be a Melchite because he was a Jacobite king. Now, again, we're going to go to sources that are eyewitnesses, right? So this is 1625. A man was born in 1625. It says, whom they termed Melchites or royalists, from their attachment to the emperors of the East. Both parties have long used a liturgy which they agree. Now, Melchites is their king, their royals, who they descend from, which they agree in attributing to Saint James. So you have to be a descendant of Saint James, the first bishop of Jerusalem. Okay, so the Melchites means son of. The Melchi signifies their king. The Melchites is the descendant of the king. So now, who's this Saint James, bishop of Jerusalem? Now we're going to read from Eusebius. Now he's born in 260 AD. We're going to find out who he is. And it says, then there was James, who was known as the brother of the Lord, for he too was called Joseph's son, and Joseph Christ's father, though in fact the virgin was betrothed. And before they came together, she was found to be with child by the Holy Ghost, as the inspired gospel narrative tells us. This James, whom the early Christians surnamed the righteous because of his outstanding virtue, was the first, as the record tells us, to be elected to the episcopal throne of the Jerusalem church. Clement, in Outline's book, puts it thus: Peter, James, and John, after the ascension of the Savior, did not claim preeminence because the Savior had specially honored them, but chose James the righteous as bishop of Jerusalem. So I read all that down to show that this James, bishop of Jerusalem, is the brother of Christ. It's that James. So King James, in his ethnicity and in his line, goes to Christ, the Messiah's brother. And that's the meaning of a Melchite. And this is why it goes back to the Bible. Even in the biblical times, they always follow someone who descended from David, from Christ's brother, Joseph's son. You see how that adds up? It's really, really amazing. And this is Hebraist. And he was born in 1564. And he was born around the time of King James. And he says the Ethiopian only accepted for the true Jacobite, of whom we are speaking, make use of leavened bread. And Gregory the 13th, who proposed to found a college at Rome for the Jacobites. So these Jacobites, who look like Ethiopians, who black people, were all in Rome. According to this guy right here, it says the Jacobites of whom he's speaking. So when he used the word Jacobites, that's who he's talking about. So he says further, let's get down here. He says the Jacobites who are scattered and dispersed throughout Syria and the parts adjacent are still computed to amount to about 50,000 families. There is a quotation in Berrywood wherein the number was then advanced to 160,000. Now, what's crucial about this is, yes, they went to France, but the Jacobites ended up in England. So we have to hear word about Jacobites in England. Now, according to this guy here, who was born around the same time as King James, says that there were black Jacobites in Berrywood. And he says 160,000. This is Berrywood. Berrywood is in England. So all these eyewitness accounts are saying the exact same thing. And this is a scholar and a journalist who would have lived around the time of Queen Anne, King Charles II, around that time, mostly Queen Anne, and King James II. And he says here, according to Shakespeare, he says, I sometimes, according to Shakespeare, sit like my grandsire cut in alabaster, sleep while I wake, and creep into the jaundice by being peevish. I would furnish out a table of merry fame in envious admiration of those jovial braids who disappoint the strokes of age and fortune with the same gaiety of soul. Now, he's speaking from the time of Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare was around when King James is around. And he's talking about these great people. Now, we're going to skip down and see who he's talking about. It says, they are generally of that complexion, which was in fashion during the pleasurable reign of Charles II. Some of them indeed are of a lighter brown, whose fortunes fell with that of King James. So this shows you that the line of the Stuarts from the time of Shakespeare during King James I all the way to the time of King Charles II and King James II were brown, and some were of a lighter but still brown. This is someone who's witnessed it, and this is what he says. Now we're gonna deal with that word complexion, because I know complexion doesn't mean hair. We're gonna find out. Does it mean hair? We're gonna find out. Now this is Princess Anne of Denmark, and this right here is Christian the First, and Queen Anne is a descendant of him. This is King James' wife. And Oldenburg, they go back to the Franks. Now again, I do want to preference, as I said before, not everybody in Europe was black. The Franks is what I'm holding in on. The Picts are also black as well, but the Franks and the Picts are the two main people that I would say are black. Everybody else, a lot of them were white. Now Oldenburg, we're going to show this is also, King James' wife was also black. Now this historian, Patrick Fraser, he was born still around that time, early, but 791, a little bit later. And he says here, by his queen, Margaret, its daughter, to Christian King of Denmark, James, led the family of 3 children, all of them sons. And if you keep reading, it kind of goes over all of his sons in there. And then he goes back to talking about the king, which we were talking about, Christian Denmark. I'm going to skip down here. Again, all these sources, you guys can read all of them for yourself. I just honed in to get to the point, but you can read the line before, the line after, the whole chapter, the whole page, the whole book of every source that I presented, and see the context yourself. Just want to say that as well. And it says, the king was eminently handsome. His figure was tall, athletic, and well proportioned. His countenance combined intelligence with sweetness, and his deep brown complexion and black hair resembled. Now, deep black means deep, dark, brown. That's what that means. So we have English mathematician John Kersey, because what we want to do is we want to find out what that means, complexion. Now, he was born in 1616, so he would have more of an earlier definition of what this word complexion means. Let's see if it really means hair or if it means the color of the face. And according to this dictionary, it says complexion, the color of the face. So the color of Queen Anne of Denmark's, King James' wife's ancestor, is dark brown. The color of his face is dark brown. Again, I'm going to the sources in history and letting them tell the story. All right, so this is the Oxford historian right here. And she has a tract from 1642, which is called the Peggy's Coranto. Is there ascribed to Tarleton, the jester, who died in 1588. It must says Mr. Halliwell Phillips have been written earlier. The following sadly closes the period. So he's saying basically that this tract that we're reading must be older than 1642. Now, what we have right now is 1642, but they're assuming that it's a copy of something written earlier. Either way, even if we go with 1642, that's still early enough, because King Charles, King James' son, who we're talking about, was still alive. And now let's see what they described King Charles I, King James' son, as when he was still alive. And it says, end quote, "As I was going by Charing Cross, I saw a black man upon a horse. They told me it was King Charles I. Oh dear, my heart was ready to burst." So who's King Charles? Oh, that black man on a horse. So, black man, is it, what is black really talking about? Is it talking about his mood? Is it talking about his hair? We hear black man, back then when they used the word black man, it meant, let's see. So this is John Ogilvy. He's born 1600s. He was born around the same time and would have known King Charles I. Perfect source here. And now let's see what he says about other people that were described as black people. Let's see. And he says, be very careful how they meddle with a black woman by reason of the inequality of their constitutions. The dropsy is very frequent, which they cure by applying honorably the oil of coconuts. Now again, this is about Africa. And the juice of several herbs of which the Negroes have good knowledge. So this black woman, who's interchangeably described, this Negro woman, as we read, went in his trips to Africa, is described as a black woman. Now we know this cannot be talking about her hair, because why would you address someone by their hair color when everybody basically in Africa has dark, black, or brown hair? So clearly talking about ethnicity. So if this is talking about an actual black woman, King Charles was called a black man. This lady is called a black woman, who's also called a Negro. Same time period, same meaning, they're black. Now we're gonna go to Barbara Alexander Rowland, because now we're gonna deal with King Charles I's wife. We're gonna cover all bases. We're gonna deal with his wife now. Now his wife, we're going to read about what he says, because obviously he's a barber. He would have history of hair. And he says, for all old writers admit that perruques, now this is talking about fake hair. He says, were an importation from that country. And Stowe says that they were introduced into England about the time of the massacre of Paris, about 1630. The hair began to be chiefly worn in a sort of crop curled and the short fine curls over the forehead and following in ringlets on the neck. Henrietta, Queen of Charles I, is said to have introduced this fashion. I'm going to read down here. It says, the dresses with wigs of diverse hues. In Pepys' diary, we found the following remark, 1664. May 13th. The days my wife wear light-colored locks. So now, I read that and I went over that to show you guys that Henrietta wore fake hair. And we see examples of light-colored fake hair, right? She wore fake hair. Well, first of all, who does that sound like? But let's go in a little bit deeper. We're going to go even deeper than that. This is historian James Howell, born in 1594. Now, this is to be an eyewitness account. And this is in March 1626. This is when Henrietta was the Queen of England. Check that out. And it says, I thank you for your letter. Several good tidings sent me from Wales. In requital, I can send you gallant news, for we have now a most noble new Queen of England, who in true beauty is beyond the long woe in Santa. For she was of a fading flaxen hair. Okay, now it's flaxen, blonde hair, but more than likely it was fake hair. Here's another description of her. It says, big-lipped and somewhat heavy-eyed. But this daughter of France, this youngest branch of Bourbon, being but in her cradle, when the great Henry, her father, was put out of the world, is of a more lovely and lasting complexion, a dark brown. So we already know what complexion means. So we have a woman with fake hair, And I'm sure she wore natural hair sometimes too. Big lips and dark brown skin, with a husband called a black man. You can draw your conclusion with that. We're gonna keep it moving. So this is another source here. This is English publisher John Dunton, 1659. And this would be an eyewitness account because he was born at the same times when King Charles II and King James II was alive. Now, these would be King James' grandchildren. This would be King Charles I, 2 sons. So we went from King James and we went all the way to the grandchildren now. Now we're going to see how they look. Now it says door, and in the middle, a tall black man standing bold, upright. And through the door, there appeared a light, and of many flamboys burning, whereupon they stood still, thinking it to be King James or some great courtier. So they saw a black man they thought was King James. This is talking about the second. And mourning, but not seeing him stir, they began to be amazed, and had not the power to speak to one another. However, the gentlewoman took such a full view of him as to see that he had plain white muffin ruffles and carven quilled very neat. They both saw his face and were satisfied 'twas that of King Charles II. So King Charles II, King James II, King James I, King Charles I are all described as being black and brown people. And this is the professor of linguistics, and this is what he has to say. He said, although his attempt to date the omelet to 1625 to 650 is not certain, but see his paleographical arguments. And he says his observation is that the matrices, lexion, Hebrew letters used to represent vowels of the text of the omelet match those of the Masoretic text is significant. Thus, the silver scrolls are best understood as written copies of the biblical text. So those scrolls match the biblical text, the Masoretic text. Check this out. We're going to discover who the Masoretes are. This is what we added up, why the nationality is very important to understand. This is the Jacobites starting in the 6th century, and they're called Masoretes. And we see here, this is the catalog of the Persian manuscripts in the British Museum. It said, describe the head of punctuation of the Syriac Masora. Nearly all of these represent the labors of the Jacobite schools. And if we read down here, it says the Jacobite Masoretes extended their labors not only over the whole Bible, but also over the texts such as Greek writers. So this is why I'm saying, that's why I'm harnessing on the King James version of the Bible, because his ancestors were the very people who actually dealt with the manuscripts. And that's why I wanted to point that out. And then also, so this is a linguist here, and she states, Saley comes to the same conclusion as Goshen Gottstein, and he talks about the text, the textual fluidity of the Jacobite Masoretic tradition. So it's known from early manuscripts that these are Jacobites who did this. This is why I went into the Jacobites, to show he was a Jacobite, y'all. I hope y'all getting the whole connection and how this pans out. The Jacobites translated the Bible from Jacobite manuscripts. King James Bible, New Testament. The King James Bible was translated out of the Codex Bezae. Now, it says here that the manuscript was discovered in the monastery of Irenaeus. Irenaeus knew Polycarp, who actually knew the apostles, so this is a very, very good source. The manuscript was found in 1562. So the manuscript that was found for translating the King James New Testament of the Bible wasn't found. The manuscript that was used to translate the New Testament of the King James Bible wasn't even found until after the Geneva Bible was already published. So it's impossible for the King James Bible to have used the Catholic manuscript of the Geneva Bible, because the manuscript they used wasn't found until the Geneva Bible was already published. When the Geneva Bible was being written, the manuscript that was used for translating the King James Version of the Bible wasn't even found yet. So these details matter, because this goes into it's been translated so many times. It hasn't. The manuscript was literally just found at that time. So there wasn't a whole bunch of different translations of it. The Geneva Bible is the result of a bunch of different translations. And even still, people say that it's still pretty similar. But just wanted to get that fact straight. And it says the manuscript here, the manuscript is best dated by the end of the 4th, the beginning of the 5th century. All right, and this here is sent by Theodore Beza to William Cecil, the chancellor, perhaps via the late letters of nephew Anthony Bacon. It says that he basically offered it to the Cambridge University as a gift. I'm going to show you guys that the Beza manuscript is the manuscript that was used for the New Testament. Check this out. Bibliographer Jacques, 1665 is when he was born. So this is written in Latin, y'all. So I told y'all that I'm really getting into it. You got to find it in different languages sometimes to make the discoveries. Got the translation here. It says 1564, 1598. All right. It says, with the last preface of Beza, so that the text and versions are arranged as Beza version. And we know that the version that was made after 1598 was the King James Version. So this is letting us know that the version that was used, he's stating this, was Beza's version. I'm going through the details of everything because it was very meticulously done. Now we're going to show here, without a shadow of a doubt, of the Textus Receptus, where that actually comes from. Now this is his writings again, and he lists here. Now you see the circle where I circle here. It circles a bunch of different authors, and then it shows their works. So it shows this guy, then the last one it shows is Theodore Beza, and we see here he has a lot of works. And one of the works that he actually did is the Textus Receptus, the received text. It's very interesting. The reason why they call it the received text is because the Cambridge University received the text from Theodore Beza, and the Textus Receptus is a printer of Theodore Beza's work. Now people have different things about the Textus Receptus. It's just a printer, y'all. So remember, it's a very old manuscript. So the reason why there are certain things that were done by the Textus Receptus is because it's an old manuscript. So they had to pretty much, like, if there was any warning, it was very worn. They wanted to make a clear, fresh copy, you know, correcting anything that was because of worn. It's a very old manuscript. So now that's the manuscript that they used to translate the King James Version of the Bible. Now 500 to 400 AD, all right, dating all the way there. Now this manuscript that they use actually matches an even older manuscript. All right, so we're going to be reading from this archaeologist, and this archaeologist right here states, quoting another archaeologist, he says, Thide examined 3 New Testament fragments called Magdalen Papyrus because it was donated to Magdalen College in Oxford, England. And then he goes on to talk about that. I'm going to read down here. It says, Dr. Thade carefully redated them and placed them at 66 AD, making them the only first century New Testament fragment extant. Alright, and then he says there is more, using a very technical and accurate epifluorescent confocal laser scanning microscope. He found that the Matthew 26:22 fragment revealed the Textus Receptus reading. It reads Hekasotos Aton, every one of them, as the King James reads, as opposed to Hayes Hekastos, each one after the other, as the critical text reads. Alright, so that's an important thing, because he's stating that it does match the King James Textus Receptus, which is the Bizet manuscript. Now we're going to get another witness as well, this guy right here, and we're going to read about him. He translated, this is Tom Holland. He translated the writings of Herodotus. Now Herodotus was born in 484 BC. He's Greek. So he translated Greek works to English, and this is why it's very pertinent to go to a source of someone who knows Greek and who is a Greek translator, because he translated Herodotus, so he knows about what translation should look like. Now let's go into his expertise. Now this is one of the things that were said about Tom Holland. It says, unquestionably the best translation of Herodotus to have appeared in the past half century. I am in awe of Tom Holland's achievement. So this guy was very good at translation and understanding the Greek and literary translations, and he was very admired by other scholars. So this is what he has to say about the Magdalen Papyrus, called the P64. It says the P64 has the same reading found in the traditional text and the King James Version. Although the papyrus fragment is worn, Dr. Thide was able to determine the original reading using an extremely powerful device. So we have one of the best Greek translators known to have translated the Herodotus, who was a Greek historian born 484 BC. We have archaeologists confirming the same thing, that this translation of the King James Version of the Bible is the manuscript of 66 AD, when the apostles were still walking the earth.